This lesson I'm going to split over 2 class periods. It's comparative and superlative. The first day is all review. It's comparative and superlative of adjectives. You did this in French 1 for the comparative and French 2 for the superlative. And as a review, the comparative, le comparatif, is when you're using an adjective, is to say that someone is more, less, or as much of that adjective than someone else. The equivalent in French is to use plus for more, moins for less, and aussi for as, followed by the adjective, and then que to mean than the other person or thing that you're comparing it to. We'll get into more detail below with the exact wording that you're going to use. In English, for some of our adjectives, we can use the er as a suffix, We can say taller, shorter, smarter, but there's no equivalent to that in French. So you'll have to say more tall, more short, more smart, or less tall, if that's the direction you're going with for the comparison. Superlative is when you're saying that someone is the most something or the least of an adjective. There's no equally form for that because you're not the equalist of something. So when you're saying that someone is the most or least of an adjective, what you're going to use is le, la, or les. You need the article there. Plus or moins for most and least, followed by your adjective as well. And just like using the er suffix for the comparative, in English, we use est as a suffix for the superlative to say that someone is the tallest, shortest, smartest. But there's no equivalent to that in French, so you'll say the most tall, the most short, the most smart. For your word order for how you're going to write these, I gave you some examples below. I gave you the sentence in English that I'll show you how to translate that. But your word order up at the top, think of this as like a mathematical formula. This is what you're going to follow. So when you write it, it's the exact same order that it is in English. So when you're comparing someone based on an adjective, you begin with the subject, Sophie. In this case, your verb is always going to be être in this case because you're saying someone is taller, is smarter. So we're always going to have a form of être. These will all be present tense sentences, so Sophie est. And what we're going to say is less tall. So we're going to use moins for less. And then our adjective, grand. But you'll notice up here there's a star, which tells you to go down below here. And it says that the adjective has to make gender number agreement with the subject of the sentence, not the person being compared to. So this grand has to agree over here with Sophie. It's not going to agree with Jacques at the end because we're saying that Sophie is less tall. So the tall is agreeing with Sophie, which means we're going to put an E for feminine agreement on that. Than will be the word que and compared to Jacques at the end of the sentence. So Sophie est moins grande que Jacques. Superlative is when we're saying someone is the most something. And then here at the end, I put in the brackets there of the group. So with superlative, you sometimes will state the group. Someone is the smartest of the class, or the tallest on the team, or the funniest of their friends. You don't always have to define what that group is. I think in all of these sentences I did define it, but just know that when you're using the superlative, you don't necessarily have to state what the group is. You could just say that someone is the tallest or the smartest or the funniest. So an example here of the superlative, again, you've got your word order up at the top, functions fairly similarly. The difference here, what makes the superlative different, is that le, la, or les. We've got an article in it. That tells you down here that the article has to match with the gender and number of the subject. So in this case, we're using we as a subject. It's a plural subject. Nous. So that tells us down here that we're going to use les because we need a plural the to match with the plural subject. So être is going to be conjugated. And again, it's always going to be the verb être because we're saying we are the most smart. So for most, we're going to use plus intelligent. Didn't really give myself enough space to write that. And again, the intelligent is agreeing over here with nous, which we just talked about the fact that that was plural. So we're going to have an S on there for agreement because this adjective is going to agree just like the comparative adjective does. And the group in this case of the students, des élèves. So we've got the de for of the group and les élèves, the students. So of the, in this case, the de and les contracts into des. Down below, what I gave you were the adjectives that have irregular comparative and superlative forms. It's not mandatory that you use these. It will sound better if you do them. Bon, we know, is our adjective for good. And in English, it wouldn't be wrong if you say that something is more good. It sounds a little awkward, but what we try to do, instead of using plus bon for more good, we're going to use the word better. The word meilleur, with an E and an S for feminine and plural agreement. When you're making it superlative, you have your le, la, or les at the beginning, and the same form of meilleur to say the best. The best. And then similarly for mauvais, mauvais being the adjective for bad, the comparative adjective pire, which already has an E, so it'll be the same form for the feminine, is worse. Now you can say plus mauvais, more bad. Sounds a little awkward in French, just like it does in English, so you can replace plus mauvais with the word pire instead to say worse. And then to say the worst, you have your le, la, or les article in front of that adjective. On the second page, this is practice. This is just for your reference. This is not something that you have to hand in, but I gave you some translation sentences for comparative and for superlative. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, you've got your answers to check your work. So feel free to check those as you go along. There is a separate assignment that you'll actually turn in, but it's a great start to work on translating these sentences and checking your work as you go along.